Well, let's get some more analysis on the situation in Niger, and we can speak now to Leonardo Villalón, who is a professor of political science and African studies at the University of Florida. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. It's now been about a week, well, exactly a week, since the start of the coup d'etat in Niger, and I'm just wondering if that's given you the chance to really sort of get some perspective on the possible causes of that coup. Do you think, with these 7 days of hindsight, that this was a purely internal series of issues, or do you think there was some external influence and interference in bringing about that coup in Niger?
I think it seems clear that the immediate precipitating cause was purely internal. It was personal. It had to do with grievances by the Presidential Guard and fears by the Presidential Guard of changes to be instituted by President Bazoum. And it seems very clearly to be driven by that. Now, that said, in the background, there's been now justifications having to do with the deficiencies of the current regime. And of course, as we've just been hearing, blames of outside pressure and outside power and interference, and notably France. But it does seem to have been driven primarily by the immediate precipitating cause was really grievances between the Presidential Guard and the president.
I just wondered, how do you explain the sudden appearance of all these Russian flags and pro-Russia slogans and banners all over the place?
Yeah, it's very clear that across the region, including in Niger, for a long time, these sentiments are there. The pro-Russian and the anti-French sentiments are there. They have been fairly muted in Niger compared to neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali, of course, but they're certainly there. What I think we've seen in the last week is that this military regime now coming into power is trying to find ways to justify a coup that really we didn't see it coming. It didn't seem to have, there was no build up to it. As in previous coups in Niger or as in neighboring Mali and Burkina Faso, there wasn't massive popular dissatisfaction. There wasn't an immediate political or institutional crisis. And so now there's an effort to mobilize and to find the kind of rationale that can sort of legitimate the coup. And of course, the anti-French sentiment and pro-Russian one is an important one, as are grievances around the last election that were simmering in Niger, even though surprisingly in the last 2 years, I think President Bazoum had actually gained in legitimacy rather than lost legitimacy.
I mean, I know, of course, we don't have any opinion polls or anything like that, but I mean, just what's your hunch as to what the level of public support is for the coup d'etat, though?
My guess is it's pretty split. It's very split, but again, that's a guess. We don't have public opinion. The last election 2 years ago was very split. President Bazoum won it narrowly or didn't win it, and won it only by cheating, depending on your point of view. So the point is that it was a very divided situation, and I think there's reason to expect that there's that sentiment of sort of in favor of the regime and against the regime. President Bazoum continues. I think that it's growing, though. I saw this morning that there's been a statement by the teachers' union in Niger that is fairly non-committal and certainly does not criticize the coup. I think that there's a growing sentiment that there's sort of justifications and rationales emerging in support of the coup and accepting it.
ECOWAS, the regional body, is in a bit of a bind, isn't it? Because they've made this threat that they're going to engage militarily if their demands aren't met by this coming weekend. I mean, even in the face of a threat from Mali and from Burkina Faso, which we've already heard, I mean, do you think ECOWAS is likely to stand up to the coup leaders militarily?
I think you're exactly right. This is a terrible bind, and it was somewhat surprising to me that they drew that red line so clearly and threatened as military intervention as a real possibility. The scenario under which you actually get an invasion, presumably coming from the south, from Nigeria into Niger, and what that would entail is really difficult to imagine. And so I think ECOWAS is going to find itself, this morning's statement said that force would be a last resort. I think they're trying to find ways to find some kind of a compromise, face-saving solution on all sides. The problem is, as it goes on further and further, the face-saving on all sides becomes more and more difficult as positions become entrenched. And so it's becoming harder to see a solution that can be negotiated, but it's also very hard to envisage an actual military intervention.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Leonardo Villalón, Professor of Political Science and African Studies at the University of Florida. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to France 24.
Thank you.